Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming tonight to the first session of the new Art of Suburbia. We're really glad you can make it out tonight. It's a very exciting event. We've been looking forward to it for a while, and we look forward to the discussion tonight. We're honored to have Janet Fitzsimmons from West Hill Community Services, as well as Ian Chodikoff, who is editor at Canadian Architect Magazine. And tonight, our moderator will be Matthew Blackett from Spacing Magazine. I'd like to start out by thanking Centennial College and the Center for Creative Communications for recording the podcast this evening. I'd also like to thank Spacing Magazine again for their support of the series, and to Matthew and Sean especially for moderating these events. But just without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to Matthew. Thank you.
I'm the publisher of Spacing Magazine. We're a Toronto-based magazine. Focuses on this area, the Toronto area, the GTA. And our tagline is understanding Toronto's urban landscape. And so that's kind of a vague tagline, but it really does encompass what we're really interested in, which is a variety of issues, from architecture and planning to transportation, to our environment and our rivers and our waterfronts, to arts and culture and how it has effect on the citizens and neighborhoods and different types of communities within the city. So we're just about to celebrate our 5th anniversary next week with the launch of our 13th issue. And what kind of excites us as a magazine about this is we've been there's 6 editors that run the magazine, including myself, and I'm the only one that was actually born in Toronto, and everyone else was from outside of Toronto: Brampton, London, Windsor, Barrie, and me, I'm not even like Toronto proper, as in the old city of Toronto. I'm a North York boy. I grew up in downtown North York along Yonge Street in the Yonge and Sheppard neighborhood. So, and I was lucky enough to attend Earl Haig Secondary School in the Claude Watson Program for the Arts. So at a young age, in a teenage age, I was able to take part in a community that thrived on the arts. And so that was dance and music and drama and visual arts, and it was, for me, it was a fascinating experience to be exposed to all of this, because I previously I've been pretty my family wasn't really arts oriented, but I discovered that I had a real good visual arts side to me, and it was very much like a school-like thing, From my perspective, when I moved downtown, and I was meeting people that lived in the older part of the city, when they found out that I was from North York, and I had this kind of rich cultural and artistic experience as a teenager, people were extremely surprised that that was actually happening in the suburbs. And so I've been able to keep drawing on that experience of my time growing up in North York, and I played competitive hockey, and we drove all over the city. So I got to actually see the West Side, and I got to see Scarborough a fair bit, and I got to know people and people I played with. So I got to experience this whole city right from a young age. And when I started this magazine, it was this kind of a real affection for the city that I had, and that my cohorts had too. Most of them had been in the city for less than 5 years, but they had really come to love it, and they had experienced it from an arts and culture kind of background. So as we move forward with the magazine, most of us all live downtown now, and it's been one of our goals is to continuously not forget that life exists outside of the old city of Toronto in many ways, especially from an arts and culture perspective. And so we've tried to make sure to explore and do really strong articles and strong representation from the suburbs in our magazine, so that Etobicoke and East York and York and Scarborough and North York get the representation just as much as like the core of the city. And so what's exciting for us is that our summer issue is going to be entirely focused on the inner suburbs of Toronto. And so we're going to look at it from a variety of different angles, from transportation and communities and arts and culture and whatnot. So this is really an exciting opportunity for us to kind of start to get the ball rolling and expose us to new people and to new ideas, new projects that are going on in other parts of the city. So thank you very much, Tim and the Suburbs Council for this. So I'm going to introduce the panel here. I got some bios that I'm going to read out for you. Immediately here to my left is Janet Fitzsimmons. Janet is a health promoter working with the West Hill Community Services and a founding member of Project Random Community Arts Project in East Scarborough. Throughout her 20-year career in community development, Janet has been a champion of arts-based programming. She also co-founded She Says, a literary mentorship program for low-income women in 1999, has been an active advocate supporting arts throughout her community, throughout the communities she's worked in. And on the far side there is Ian Chodikoff. Ian is an architect and the editor of Canadian Architect magazine. He has a background in political science and he holds graduate degrees in architecture and urban design from University of British Columbia and Harvard. He's a smart guy, it seems. He has undertaken projects ranging from the relationship between natural and man-made influences of urban parks to the effects of social inclusion and community diversity on urban design. Over the past several years, he has helped facilitate a series of design charrettes and presentations with the City of Toronto and Design Exchange to improve the built environments in several priority neighborhoods across Toronto. He also recently curated the multimedia exhibition entitled Fringe Benefits, Cosmopolitan Dynamics of a Multicultural City, which explores the effects of multiculturalism on Toronto's suburban communities. And as an affiliate of the Institute for International Urban Development in Cambridge, he is currently participating in a study examining the effects of transnationalism. Hopefully he'll explain to the rest of us what transnationalism is, and land markets in West Africa. He also has lectured in various universities and cities across North America and Europe and has served on numerous juries. He's written in a variety of magazines and journals on issues ranging from planning and sustainability. He's committed to his profession and has spoken and consulted with a variety of municipalities on contemporary urban issues.
Okay, I'm just going to walk you through a little bit about my experience in East Scarborough. And just to let you know, I am a Scarborough girl. I grew up about 2 blocks from the community that I work in. I work primarily in Kingston, Galloway. And I've been connected to Scarborough my whole life. Although I have at different times worked downtown and lived downtown. I actually live back out here now, and I'm loving it. One of the things that I'm fortunate to do in my work is I'm able to advocate for the kind of programs that I think are going to matter to the youth that I work with. And one of those programs is Project Random, which is a community arts project specifically designed for youth that operates out of East Scarborough. It's the most amazing partnership. If you ever want to have a really strong community partnership, I'm going to tell you right now what the holy trinity of good partnership is. You need to partner with City of Toronto Culture Division, and you need to partner with Toronto Community Housing. Those are my 2 partners, and then West Hill Community Services, which is my employer, is the 3rd partner. Absolutely phenomenal people to work with, and so supportive of this project. The project basically emerged out of a conversation with some youth in Kingston, Galloway around a lack of creative and expressive programming. There were things going on in community centers, but those things cost money or were 2 bus rides away, that sort of thing, and didn't feel representative of the local community. Didn't feel like they were something that connected back to the places and spaces that matter to these youth. We also, that sort of coincided with some discussion that was going on at the Kingston Galloway Neighborhood Action Table. For those of you who don't know, Neighborhood Action Partnership is a vehicle designed by the City of Toronto for for Toronto's 13 priority neighborhoods. Every priority neighborhood has a neighborhood action table, which consists of all the city departments and all the agencies that do work in a particular community, coming together to coordinate programming. So at the same time as I was talking to these kids about sort of what they were seeing as a gap in service, I was also talking to our partners at the Neighborhood Action Table around how can we fill this gap. The project was designed largely in collaboration with youth from the community, and it was designed with a few purposes in mind. We were committed to increasing social inclusion. So although the project is for youth, it's actually, it's a more broad community engagement strategy. Our hope is to involve all aspects of the community in different aspects of the project. We wanted to see neighborhood beautification. We wanted to celebrate the diversity of the neighborhood and include a lot of the newcomer populations that exist within that community. And we wanted to provide a vehicle for young people to see themselves as artists and for them to recognize art as a viable career opportunity, as opposed to what we're often sort of told in our society, which is that that's really great, but you really ought to learn to type because you never know. And we wanted to mentor to these young people that, no, you know what, in fact, this can be a career. Lots of people have made it a career, and that those opportunities are available to you. So that's Project Random. I brought some of the youth from Project Random with me tonight, and we've done some good things. We've done I think 3 permanent installations in the community now. We have 6 murals on the side of East Scarborough storefront. We have a mosaic project that we did at Kingston and Galloway in one of the Toronto housing buildings. And there's a third one. But that's basically Project Random, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. Lucky me. And yeah, I guess we'll talk more when the questions come up.
I'm a bit of a convert to a lot of things, and I'm continuing to discover how to visualize the city, how to see things that we as architects can help engage the community, and how community can feel more empowered about affecting change into their built environment. I guess the trajectory why I'm here is at Canadian Architect, I'm in sort of an unusual role because I'm often taken around by these fancy architects showing me their fancy buildings, going to fancy dinners, and understanding the fancy process to build fancy buildings for fancy people. And I start to realize that a lot of that is it has a particular place in the city, but for people that do not live in, let's say, Yonge and Bloor, a cultural institution like the Royal Ontario Museum has very little cultural relevance to people who might live in Scarborough. And that's sort of in a nutshell why I'm very interested in the magazine, to kind of educate architects in terms of the opportunities that exist in areas that they may not traditionally view as being a very rich cultural landscape. And the more I start to look into areas outside of the so-called purview of capital A architecture, the more I realize of how dumb or stupid a lot of architects really are in going after those capital A projects, because the clients are kind of boring, their demands are boring, the outcome is often very boring, and the sustainability factor of them, not the environmental sustainability, the cultural sustainability for these institutions often requires so much continued capital input to keep them going that one wonders if they're kind of sort of outmoded pillars of our city. So when I come out to areas of Scarborough, and incidentally I travel a lot to various municipalities or city regions across the country, you start to realize that as a designer, I kind of look at things a little differently than many people, and I often see the invisible. And it's those invisibles that I think hold a tremendous amount of opportunity. So when you walk down the street, and I have a slide that's up, the slide that you see here, where do you think that is? Right. Oh, okay. It's in Mississauga, okay. But the thing is the point when you show it to people, they often think it's in Pakistan, it's in Lahore, what's going on. It's Mississauga. And despite sort of the seemingly bad rap that Mississauga has, or Scarborough has, or Markham has, these communities have incredibly rich social networks that exist within them. And ways that designers aren't really realizing the full potential, and in the ways that the people that live there don't even really, they almost take it for granted in terms of how rich community they might have. So when I put together the exhibition of Fringe Benefits, this was the card that went out, and this was taken in Thorncliffe Park in Don Mills. And I chose it because it's very interesting. It's a bit fortuitous that when this bridge, the original pattern, was built in the 60s, it did not contain or wasn't adjacent to the highest percentage of Muslim Canadians in Canada. Today it is. People that get off the plane from Dubai or from Lahore or from Mumbai and they come to Toronto, they don't go to the CN Tower, they don't go to the Brom, they go to Thorncliffe Park because that's where they can go to get themselves kind of hooked into the social network that's very global. And so this photo, when you see this bridge, which is a very Islamic-inspired pattern on this concrete bridge, the thing is that beyond that bridge, there's an abyss, there's the ravine, there are trees, and in the very distance, there's the CN Tower. And when we talk about that 2-bus ride away phenomenon, or 3-bus ride, or 2 subways and a bus ride, you realize, like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, downtown Toronto, it's people that live in Brampton or Mississauga, they know what's happening in the latest restaurants in Delhi, New Delhi or Mumbai, before they even give a rat's ass about the spot podcast. They don't care the new restaurant on Queen Street. That's for a specific kind of demographic. And we have to just realize that it's understanding new cues within the city. So when you go to New York, people go, oh, New York, multicultural Chinatown. We understand what's happening, but at the same time, we're not even looking that far beyond the surface. We see things for sale. We see new ways in which things are merchandised, encroaching the street, encroaching the territory, and you think that there's actually new ways of seeing our cities, just as there are new ways to see Lawrence Avenue East or Kingston Road. And that if you look beyond kind of what these territories really are, this is an empty parking lot in Chinatown, but it's taken over, becomes a very wealthy, a very rich opportunity for a temporary market, and it re-inhabits that kind of landscape. This is an image of Florence, right? This is the image of Florence that most people in Florence live in, and this is the image of Florence that the travel agencies like to support. But both are occupying the same urban realm. It just depends on how you look at those spaces. So when you see this bridge, and you see these guys selling that merchandise on that bridge, if you're a tourist, you may, is it cheap, is it not, you move on. But those guys are connected to this guy, which sends money back to this man, which is responsible for this kind of urban development, or sprawl, or speculation, or whatever you want to call it, but the thing is that it's linked. So the issues of transnationalism is what happens in Toronto. That first slide that I showed you of that man in Mississauga, he's linked to how many people we don't know all over the world, a very sophisticated network, and that leveraging that social capital is incredible. And a city like Toronto has an incredible amount of resources. It's just a matter of how we as designers can kind of see that simultaneity. Like, this is an interesting slide because if you're looking for a double-double at Tim Hortons, you know how to look for it. But if you're looking for a Hindu astrologer or a deal on a sari, you may not know where to look unless you're clued in to the signs. And this is a very kind of tongue-in-cheek because there's other signs out there on the street, storefronts or places to go or neighborhoods. But it's that matrix that we have to learn to readjust and understand. And so this map that's behind me, Toronto's kind of flipped upside down. We're often kind of so downtown centric to think about, everything happens within that area by Toronto Island, just south of there or north of there. But when you look at the areas in light gray indicate where a lot of recent immigrants have arrived in the Greater Toronto Area, and the red circles indicate specific population groups that we chose, Jewish, Italian, South Asian, Chinese, Caribbean, and just to indicate where their populations tend to center. And when you kind of take all that together, it's kind of like a collected family tree of over 5 million people. Like, you know, your grandfather might have lived in Kensington Market, and his kids maybe went up Bathurst to, you know, Bathurst and Eglinton, and his kids, grandkids now live in Thornhill or something. So if you take that and many demographic groups or in many, across a whole wide area of the city, you start to realize that there's this band, and we're living in it right now, this band of activity, of global capital, of transnationalism, et cetera, exists within Scarborough, exists within Markham, Mississauga, exists within many of the priority neighborhoods. So places that we take that are think that we don't have that great social capital is in fact something that we do have. And I just showed this because, you know, 50 years ago, the idea of the suburb or the inner suburb was built for a very homogeneous, you know, like a little blonde boy. But today, it's a very different reality, and we have a lot more variety of cultures to deal with. And when the city talks about multiculturalism, or Canadians pat ourselves on the back, when architecture critics in the Globe and Mail say how we're so culturally diverse, and we bandy about certain posters about how diverse we really are, this image would not appear on the cover of why Toronto is so multicultural. When places that exist within Scarborough or other areas of the city are poorly served by transit, are under-designed, underutilized, under-maximized by us, the architects who help find clients, who help connect with communities, who help engage in inclusionary planning. This is not, you know, does not make an effective poster about multiculturalism, because we're not activating the people that we have around us. And I think that's kind of criminal in a way for a city that touts itself as being so progressive. And it's trying. I'm not saying it's because there's amazing work being done, but maybe it's one of the themes in tonight is not so much about what we have done, but it's what we should be doing. Because when you see these kids, you know, hammering up for the camera in Thorncliffe Park, you realize that there's just infinite amount of wealth and human capital and creativity that exists all around us and within you and me and everything. So I'm not going to go too much more into that, but I thought maybe we can go back to some discussion. So thanks.
I just wanted to introduce Janelle and Kadeem. They are two young people who are involved in a project called Involve Youth. And one of their interests is looking at ways to express themselves artistically, but in a way that's relevant and has meaning to their life and their circumstance. So I'm going to ask Janelle and Kadeem to come up and to talk a little bit about the projects that they've been working on. And one of the interesting things about the approach that they've taken is that the adults that are around, that surround them, basically provide them with support, but they lead, direct, and determine the mode of how they're going to express themselves, the messages, and the outcome of whatever artistic endeavors that they decide to take on. So I'll hand it over to Janelle.
When Involve Youth, the way we do things is like, we like to show people what our community is all about. With all the violence and all the negativity, that stuff that go down in our community, drug dealing, people with gun violence, all of that. We like to show people the raw reality of it, and yet the way we feel about it. So when we made Kadeem and some other youth in our youth group, we made 2 videos, one an anti-gang video to go along with the workshop, just to let people know that all in our community, even though that stuff does go on, there's a high percentage of us that are tired of it, and we just need to express the way that we relate to other youths like us, like how to get out the cycle, how to break it, you know? Yeah.
And a lot of the things, well, as Janelle said, we made videos, we also did workshops, just to be able to not only keep within ourselves, within the people that come out to the group, to show them the way that we feel about things, you know, because if we don't do stuff like workshops or make these videos, then the rest of the people in the community, however they stay, they're going to stay like that because they may not share in our perspective, which is why they don't come to the meetings. And another thing that's going on is Protect Media. They're working to get a studio in our community, and I think that's a really good thing because a lot of the youth in our community, they're really engaged toward music, and that'll be an excellent way to be able to express themselves, So I'm glad that not only will they be able to go there and rap or make beats or whatever, or make a song or something, that's a positive way of spending your time instead of the alternatives that we have in our community already, So that's a couple of the stuff that we have in our community to do.
The thing is, the way we design our program is that, okay, for example, people that are not from the community and they come to the community, they have an impression that it's like a bad neighborhood just because of the way the buildings might be torn down looking, a lot of young youth like myself hanging around, but not knowing what we're really doing. So we like to bring a lot of other people from other communities into our neighborhood, show them spoken words, poetry, entertain them with music and videos and other workshops and skits about our community and how we can relate to them and how we could change the way society looks at us in our communities, with all the other 13 priority neighborhoods in the city.
How has community identity developed in Scarborough and its inner suburban communities?
I can answer that a little bit in that, and it's funny because it's a very downtown question to ask, because it talks about one identity and Scarborough is about 50 identities, and it's about 50 villages. And oftentimes, from outside, people see Scarborough as one thing. But if you talk to people who live here, you will hear people refer to their neighborhood before they'll refer to Scarborough, and that's what they identify with. And I think that's one of the things that that's really an emerging voice out here, is that there are lots of different ways that identity has developed in these different communities. Sure, there are tons of commonalities, but what I've certainly experienced and what I've learned from people from working out here is that, someone from Kingston Galloway has more in common with someone from Jane Finch or, someone from Regent Park, although it's a downtown community, than they do with, say someone from Forest Hill and I think those are the lines that we need to look at in terms of identity, is looking at those small village identities that exist within Scarborough.
What's interesting about that is that you said it's a downtown question, but that's also how I think most people downtown identify themselves as well. They don't say I'm from Toronto. They say I'm from Parkdale. They say I'm from the Annex. They say I'm from the Danforth or Riverdale. So
We're actually hoping that soon they'll be saying they're from the greater Scarborough area.
1/3 of Toronto is Scarborough anyway, so we really are.
We're hoping to change things that way. So.
Coming from the downtown and some of the experiences that I've seen in Scarborough over the past few years, working with people like from Mural Roots, that organization, and the kind of outreach and the specificity that they have. They understand the neighborhood sensitivities and these fantastic social networks that really know where people get along and don't get along, and how they can build from that, or build from where people get along, obviously. And I think that's an incredible experience. With Kingston Galloway, I know that a few years ago we had a charrette at the Design Exchange where we brought in some youth. They were from various priority neighborhoods. This is a series that we did, and I remember from the East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club, a couple kids presented those series of problems, and Claudia was there at the time, and I was sitting there going, my God, these guys they understand stakeholder interests, they understand equipment needs, they know safety issues, they are sensitive to gender relations, they know this place inside and out, and they can describe it better than any high-paying downtown salmon-eating urban design facilitator that comes out and talks about the community. And I'm listening there, and I'm like, oh my God, like what are our schools, what are our design schools not doing that are making, what are they doing to make professionals that can help steward or help handhold these kids into making a better environment? What are we doing that's making us blind to their needs? And that was really quite striking to me. And a third element, and I brought some slides with me, was the Taste of the Lawrence initiative that's now, I guess, they just finished their second run or third run. And to bring people together where you're walking down a closed off section of Lawrence Avenue and people are going, I'm from Wexford, right? And it's like, wow, I didn't always thought it was to Scarborough, but it goes way deeper than that. And the fine grain of activity and pride in Toronto was very interesting, because people identify the school or where they go or library that they go to, and people in Parkdale go there. There's a much more homogeneity, relatively speaking, between a Queenster, a guy that likes to go up and down Queen Street, or someone who lives in the Annex.
No, hold on there.
Okay. But I'm just saying that.
It's reverse stereotyping.
Okay. I don't want to play to the crowd.
Reverse.
I don't want to play the crowd, but I just think that the level of my experience has certainly realized that there's an incredible amount of diversity and social capital here, and that I have no idea.
Well, first of all, with my neighborhood, it wasn't really known by a lot of other areas, right? So, like you said before, we wouldn't really identify with a city, we would just identify with where we're from, and people wouldn't really know, So, what we did, we're known by people in other communities that are close to us, like Warner Ridge, or something like that, right? Or down in Birchmount and St. Clair. So we told people who were from Canadian, Eglinton, or Upper Worth Road, and they started to hear more and more about it. They thought of it as, a bad neighborhood. They heard it was a priority neighborhood. They started thinking negative of us. So we started flipping that around, doing something positive in it. And when other people heard about it, they started not to like it, Just to show you that how, we're all in one city, and other people in other cities look at us all together, but we're really divided, No matter how multicultural our communities itself are, we're still divided for a little bit.
Yeah, I'd like to say the same thing. I realize that I identify with my community, as well as my school, because I guess people are also looking for something to identify with, something that they can use to reflect themselves with, I guess. So I didn't really think of myself as living in Scarborough. Now that you mention it, I realized that I thought of myself as living in EP, living in my community, going to Cedar Bay. Those are my two things that I identify with, But I realize now that because I have a church, my church now is in Kingston and Galloway, and now I go down there a lot, And I realize that when I go down there, I don't feel like I'm at home there, even though we still live in the same general area, I don't feel like that's part of my identity, or that I can relate to that area. So I guess that's how it's turned out now. But as Janelle said, that's something that we're trying to break. We're trying to bring together the communities. So whenever we hold events, we're always inviting other neighborhoods to come over to our neighborhood and take part. So we're not only just catering to the people in our community, we're trying to bring a unity between all of the priority areas or priority neighborhoods that there are, so that people can, instead of just identifying with the area, they can identify, okay, we're going over here, this is still part of our area, this is still part of Scarborough. So that's what we're doing to try to counteract that.
I think one of the greatest challenges we have as a city is that we were once the city of Scarborough, the city of North York, the city of Toronto, and now we're this big mega city, and we're learning how to, I guess, relate to each other a little bit more, because it was much more, I'm from North York, I'm from Scarborough, or whatever the case would be, those areas. But now that that line that's Victoria Park that separated North York and Scarborough doesn't exist anymore. It only exists in the political boundaries of wards and systems. So I think it's one of those challenges that we face as a city, and as we kind of move forward as a mega city. I think some of the answers kind of led to, I think, lead in nicely to this next question. And what is it that unifies and brings together the communities within Scarborough and the other inner suburban communities? Start with Jamie.
Okay, well, first of all, I think we're all united in our frustration around public transit. I think that there's something, okay, this is going to sound a little tangential, but I think there's something about the otherness of living in Scarborough. It's sort of almost like, and don't take this the wrong way, but I think that it's almost like the common enemy theory, right? Like we know that in large part, downtown Toronto doesn't kind of get any of us, right? In very similar ways. We know that there's beautiful uniqueness out here, and we know that each neighborhood has its own kind of landscape and its own sort of flavor and cultural makeup and all of those sorts of things. And they're similar, but they're unique. But I think we're united in that otherness, in that thing of not being downtown and not necessarily being understood on a grand scale, right? I know that sounds sort of a little bit backward, but I think that's actually a really unifying force. I know when I speak to people sort of outside of Scarborough and I identify from being here or, identify with working in Scarborough, it's sort of like, if you're out somewhere and you hear someone, if you're from, like, my family's Irish, and if I'm out somewhere and I hear someone with an Irish accent, I'm immediately sort of drawn to that, you're from Ireland, you're like me. And I see that happen with Scarborough when I'm downtown. That people go, oh, Scarborough, I'm from there too. And I think there is a unity in that, that sort of does pull those neighborhoods together and gives us that common bond. So.
I just was thinking the other day there was an article on a gentleman at the Metro Zoo who wants to put in a new memorial to, I guess, Japanese the internment camps. So, and it sort of struck me as odd that why would that be included in the zoo's mandate? But then you kind of think, well, there are every community needs a hub. Every community needs a public space or a cultural venue to kind of draw out people from their homes or draw out people from within themselves to share their ideas with community. And the zoo is trying to do it, but that indicates that there is a desire and a need within Scarborough to have those sentiments and have those places where they can share ideas, but there's not enough venues for that to happen. We have it in certain instances with the youth. I know that like the HP Centennial College campus near University of Toronto, Scarborough has a certain hub, a cultural hub, a social hub for the students that go to school there. UTS has a bit of that aspect. You see it in certain pockets within the city. And those things can really serve to unify people's ideas and kind of as a marker for community. And I think we just need to work on ways to bring that out a little bit more. So trying to bring those venues to the city. And I don't know, you guys might want to speak to that if there was an area in your community that everyone can kind of rally around a common ground, I guess.
And what are the unifiers? The unifiers, the things that unify those different pockets of Scarborough, the commonality amongst them.
Well, really, in our community, there's not that much. We just have like a rec center in our whole neighborhood, And it's just like a small room. But really what we find that draws a lot of us together is basketball, personally speaking. Because everyone in my community loves it, people in other communities love it. And we'd always go to like one other youth center down the road and play right there. That kind of brings all the people like in the general area where I'm from to that one neighborhood, because they're like the only neighborhood that has a basketball court. So we all meet up there, see like that's how we made a lot of my friends, just throughout the sport.
Yeah, I think it's like the extra, any alternative activities that are like in our communities, like as he said, the basketball and the rec centers, something that a lot of people can go to and not feel like you have to be from this area, that area to use. Because not every community had a rec center, not every community has a basketball court, is something we could use. So I guess when it's like that, I guess you have to put aside your differences and be able to come together and, use the space that's there, and you have to respect it too, because if everybody has to use it, then, everybody has to make sure that it's taken care of. So I guess those would be the unifiers.
From a youth perspective, I think something that unifies a community is having youth organizations in Scarborough that's not just targeted to like only people from Malvern can come to this organization, where they have it service to people in Scarborough that can come. So people from all around Scarborough can come and they can get together and they meet people, right? Because living in party neighborhoods, these youth are underserved, and being able to realize that even though they're from different neighborhoods, I'm from Kingston Galloway, he may be from Malvern, at the end of the day, our struggle is still similar. We're still faced by the everyday youth challenges that we have. So being able to come together in a program which is not just restricted to this neighborhood or this neighborhood kind of gives people a support where, okay, yeah, we come from different neighborhoods, but our struggle is still the same, and together we can come as one to do something about it. So.
You should identify yourself here, just so we all know who you are.
I'm Michelle. I'm one of the volunteers that works with them at Involve Youth and Kennedy Edmonton.
That's great, thank you. Why have the inner suburbs largely been ignored or underrepresented as sites of creativity and cultural activity? And kind of what I changed the why have, I think I want to answer the question, has the inner suburbs been largely ignored? And then I think you probably expand on that with your answer. So.
Or maybe we're just not quite there yet in terms of the parlance or identifying.
So the reason I ask is just because of my own personal involvement in knowing how growing up in Willowdale, like arts being a suburban neighborhood, it was rather thriving. We had at the time the North York Center for Performing Arts. It's a big kind of place, but it opened up. Showgirl came in there, so I think it was the first show, and that whole, a lot of that neighborhood or a lot of that area got transformed a lot by arts. And then the school that I went to, there was elementary school from grade 4 to grade 8, and then our high school had it, and it was really widely known, at least in the kind of the central North York kind of context. And so that kind of gives me the question: has it been ignored? Because it felt like, from my personal experience, it has, but maybe on the fringes of on the edges of the city in Scarborough and Etobicoke, maybe it has been ignored entirely.
Well, I think a lot of it is just the recognition. A lot of it comes a bit from the development community as well, where they may not necessarily see to develop a condo tower in North York or develop a condominium project in Scarborough, to tie it to creativity or tie it to the arts, the cachet is not an identified part of the pro forma, like part of the business plan that developers have, because they're not used to understanding it. You see it in the downtown core. I mean, what's frustrating is, like, a couple weeks ago I was at the inauguration of Witchwood Barn, which you would know that project, and there was
Sorry, we should maybe
Yeah,
quickly.
like-
Witchwood Barns is a former TTC streetcar barns.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure how many people know about it, and it's been converted into a green space, which is now a green arts and community kind of hub in Bathurst and St. Clair neighborhood.
Yeah, there's a series of, there were train sheds basically for streetcars, and the site was sitting vacant for many years, and there was an organization called Artscape, and this organization is very much about cultural, they're managed sort of about cultural stewardship, and traditionally they would view the artistic community north of St. Clair as cultural development. Now, I don't know if you kind of understand the tone of the difference of ideas about that, where that if you're north of, or you're in Scarborough, that means that you are a dearth of cultural activity. So if we do development up there, it's cultural development. Whereas if you're in the downtown area, you're about cultural stewardship. It's about maintaining a high level, in quotes maybe, or perceived a high level of culture, and therefore we have to carry it forward and develop it. And so the Witchwood Barns project was about making artists live work studios, about sort of community gardens, sort of an urban public market where people can buy fresh fruit and everything. And it was a real hub, a cultural hub. And everyone was very happy, very successful, and kind of congratulating each other on wonderful work that they've done. And yet, you wonder, why isn't that happening in Scarborough? Why aren't there farmers markets or that kind of activity happening out here? And partly in the downtown area, there's a greater amount of density. So people, there is a culture of walking, there is a connection of transit, and there also is more money or more perceived value about if you redevelop that site, you'll get visibility within the press, you'll get a lot of artistic people coming to visit as well as living there, and so it's seen as much more culturally viable as well as economically feasible. And I'm sitting there kind of frustrated, well, why aren't they doing this out in Scarborough? Why aren't they doing this in East Stanley? And I just think we're just not quite there yet. Like, I just don't know if the culture is at a point where developers can hold hands with people like Janet that can understand, that can lobby with the city and TC and Toronto Community Housing to make something click. And, you know, we'll just, maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely.
Just for people who don't know, this year, for the last 2 years, there has been a community market in Kingston, Galloway that has included food access programs. We've sold crafts and different things like that. There's been music, lots of stuff that's drawn the community together.
When you see stuff happening like this slide, which is interesting around Jane and Finch, where you have thousands of people living in that intersection, and there's no fresh, you know, it needs to be replicated more and more. When the best you can do is a Popeyes, like, life's got to be better than that, right? I mean, sometimes, yeah, you might want Popeyes, but there's a time when you just want, like, an apple, right? And what do you do? And it's tough. And especially if you're banned from the mall, as some kids are. So, but things need to grow. I mean, you guys, you know, I don't know what you envision for stuff that can make things click. Like for people to stand up and listen to what you guys do, talk about on weekends. What do we need to know? I mean, what are your hopes and dreams?
Well, really, I don't know so much of what we could do to make it click because we've been doing this for a while. What my opinion is and what I really think about is Scarborough's been overshadowed by like the bad. Like, alright, I'm gonna use an example. Like, say you have an area like Jane and Finch. Crime happens down there, people identify Jane and Finch, something happened there. But in Scarborough, if something happened down in Markham, Eglinton, they say Scarborough. Or in my community, they say Scarborough. So that just makes the whole city look bad, right? So if anything good does go on in our community, like, they might be on TV for like 1 or 2 days, but then it's overshadowed by the bad and all the violence that happens, so no one really cares. So they think, okay, we have like a community festival that happened down, what is it, in Gilder. No one really talks about that. But as soon as one thing goes wrong in the city, there's a shooting, there's a robbery, it's all over the news for like a week. People are just blowing it all out of proportion and don't recognize all the good that we're doing trying to stop it, you know?
Yeah, to that too, and also like the way I think of it too is like if you have a pet, you know, you can provide it with food and water, and then you just leave it there and it'll live. But I realize that, you know, the communities, you can't do that with a community. You can't leave just, okay, yeah, let me just throw a couple little food stores here and there, you know, a convenience store, and then let the community live, you know, because that's not how it is. Because as people, you know, as a neighborhood that thrives and grows, you know, we need people to care. We need people to actually come and not just do something once and then just leave it and be like, okay, bye. But we need people to actually keep the ongoing stuff, which is what we have now with Tropicana. You know, they came out with something, you know, and it's still going on. And I realized that that's something that was lacking because every time in the community where we find something good, it would be gone after a little while. So, you know, it has to be like that. It can't just be something that just comes up and goes away. There has to be an ongoing process with it, you know. We can't just leave the community after saying, okay, we gave them something, and then after that should be good enough to suffice.
Do you plan to stay to live in your neighborhood once you graduate high school and get on high school and like go to college or university or whatever you plan to do?
Me, I really don't see myself living in my community after I graduate. I plan to move on to doing bigger and better things, you know? I have a dream of having a house or whatever. I'm tired of just living in TCHC for my whole life.
Right.
But like, another comment I was about to say was, I don't know what me and we're talking about this now, is in our community, and they always want to come and act like they're doing something, but they're not. Like in my neighborhood right now, a bag of jobs or a bag of businesses are opening up, new food stores and stuff are being built. But every time that happens in our community, there's still no jobs for the youth. You know, that's like the number one problem.
Yeah, you know, the way that things are going in the community right now, I don't know. I don't plan on staying there after I graduate, you know, and have my career and stuff. I plan on moving on, because I guess like the way the community was developed, even though I can identify with the community and it feels like, that's the family I grew up with, but you know, the way that it is, the conditions of the community, and the resources and stuff, it's not really there for my. So if I don't want to really bring up children there in that environment, as much as I would like to, because we already have that sense of family and the sense of community already there. It's the neighborhood itself isn't really all that well developed. So,
I don't want to extrapolate too much out of that, but I can see that as probably one of the greatest challenges of these neighborhoods is that the people like yourselves, which are doing really good, when you have the opportunity to leave, you might leave. And that causes ends up being a gap about who the people were doing stuff, and it just becomes a cyclical thing, and maybe things don't get as good as they could be. And I'm not putting any blame on you guys for leaving or anything like that. But then it's also I'm sure your friends and family wouldn't blame you if the situation you're describing. So it's this kind of cycle which could be never ending, but it's this thing that kind of keeps happening if roots aren't firmly in place.
I would say something. I mean, these are things that we sort of the disconnects that you hear about a lot in urban planning and design, is that when you have people like Richard Florida that comes out and talks about the creative class and identifying where creativity exists and everything, and I cannot help but to feel sort of insulted by it, because it's geared towards someone who's come out with an MBA and who's taking the last flight from Calgary back to Toronto, picks the book up at the airport and says, wow, I'm going to live in Liberty Village because it's cool and I'm creative. And that's great for that particular demographic, but with that fascination with Richard Florida, the fascination with certain established neighborhoods or things that are on operating at a certain hum, which is, that needs its own food, but that fascination fails to identify how you keep people in neighborhoods, how you grow a sense of belonging, how you bring up the idea of revillagization. I mean, that beyond.
That's not his shtick, though. That's not his shtick to talk about. He just finds the data points.
Yeah, he finds the data points. But it's a way for people to kind of validate where's a good place to live, where's a good place to buy a home.
So I'll challenge you on that in a sense of how is that different than from that first slide you showed of, or the example you gave of the person that from Brampton that knows more about the restaurants in Mumbai than Queen Street. If they know that strip on Gorevale or Gore Road, is that what it is?
Well, because Richard Florida doesn't see that as a peak, he sees it as a valley.
Right.
He doesn't see it as a cultural high point, he sees it as the everything else. It doesn't fit into advertising or architecture, it fits into another kind of cultural or social paradigm. So his data points kind of miss it, right? And that's it's not that his approach is incompatible with a Sikh man selling food at Highway 10 and 5 in Mississauga. But it's that it's not a priority for his sort of methodology. It's coming from a different segment.
But I would say that it could also be
to shift that, though.
It could be the priority, though, of his child or his grandchild, and because
yeah, I'm not saying his thing is. I'm not trying to say that it's useless. I'm not saying it has no value, but when applied to where these guys live, or applied to kind of the necessary steps to create, to draw out the value that you see within these social networks that we're talking about, these communities, that there needs to be that planning methodology or mainstream thinking in the press needs to understand that we need to look for that invisible, because when we find it, we will be blown away by how much wealth and creativity exists within it, in a different definition that's propagated currently.
And I think honestly, those of us who work in these communities are kind of a bit stunned that it is so invisible, because it's so obvious to those of us who work in these communities and live in them that there's all kinds of cultural richness. There's all kinds of creative expression going on and just available. What we're lacking in those communities is mechanisms to have that recognized and validated. Thank you. I think that, again, and I'm going to come back to those mechanisms, I think that there is great cultural richness. I think there are great artistic traditions and great expressive stuff that goes on in these villages I speak of. And great talent waiting to emerge.
So how are they not served?
Well, I'm getting there. I think that the systems that are in place in terms of funding are not necessarily designed to meet those needs in the way they need to be met. I think that in the communities, and I'm only going to speak to my own experience, in the communities that I have worked in and that I have lived in, the best way to allow those talents and those sort of creative juices to emerge and flow is by using community engagement tools and by allowing art to emerge from the community and bubble up from the community as opposed to being done to the community from above or from outside. And I think those mechanisms are not readily available. And I think we need more of that.
So is it more money, or is it more access point, or more places for people to access that arts and that culture?
I think it's.
I know you need money for
No,
that as well, but is it just funds? Is it just grants, or is it?
I think it's both, because I think that art isn't something that should happen in one place in a community. Art should be, people should be able to be engaged in art in all aspects of their life, in my opinion. I think it should be in as many places in the community as it possibly can be. And people should be allowed to engage in it and with it as much, in all kinds of ways. But in terms of funding structures, I think arts funders need to really recognize what we mean when we talk about community art, and that community art emerges from within a community. It's not an expert coming in and showing the community how it works. It's the community saying, this is what we have and this is what we know, and we want this validated and recognized outside of our village. Right?
I just think that one big problem is that there's a lot of geography to cover. It's hard to stitch it together. I mean, just logistically, you can have a pocket or a neighborhood that could work, but the thing is that it becomes isolated. It really becomes its own town. Like the next intersection over is ostensibly another town. And, people do walk around. People walk up and down all over the place in places you wouldn't expect at different times of day and night. You guys can probably attest to that. But, maybe rather than thinking about it as one big problem, maybe you do have to focus on, a cluster of high rises, or a cluster or a specific intersection of the city, and kind of give it its identity, because people will come out. They already are, but it'll become more celebratory or identifiable for people that don't live within that community. Maybe that's the issue, because when you're in the community, it's plain and visible. But if you're visiting, and you come at 10 o'clock at night when you should have come at 11 or 9, then you're totally blind to it. And I don't know, like there are different times of days and nights that things really come alive in your neighborhood. And if so, how can it bring in people from outside your neighborhood to realize how special you guys really are?
So you're asking we need help?
Yeah.
Alright. Well, in my community, it's not like really a time period when people decide that they want to do something. Like anything could pop off anytime, right? Mostly people do stuff when it's dark, right? But common sense just always tells you, if you come to a neighborhood you're not familiar with, when late at night, especially imagine walking into Regent Park late at night, Common sense tells you not to do it. You don't know a lot of people down there, you're not familiar with the neighborhood, then don't go. But like I said before, people are getting killed in broad daylight. People still rob people in daylight. There's no more people are outside anyway, right? So get more like that. So really, no matter how much good you do and stuff still like that happens, you can't really tell people, oh, you can't come in the nighttime because this will happen. You can't come in the daytime because that will happen. It's just you make your choice, you know.
I guess, well, probably a good time would be to, I don't know, to have something set up would probably be like in that, I guess in the, probably later afternoon or so, or in the early evening, because like, that's when people are just like free from whatever they're doing in the day, they might be at home, they might be at school or wherever at work, but yeah, I guess that's the time when people are usually free to go do something, so I guess instead of like, I guess instead of after school, like for personally, instead of after school, going to your friends and be like, oh, so what's gonna happen, right now? And then they're like, okay, let's go here or let's go there, And those places that we're going to there's not really anything too good to come out of it. So I guess if there was something that we could go to at that time, that would be positive. We'd be able to go there instead. Like I'm even saying right now, like the way that Involved Youth is open, like after school, so you can go there straight and hang out with your friends or whatever, whoever's in the room. So I guess that's a good time to have it open because then that's when parents are having all their kids come home too, and so I've seen a lot of people coming through the room at that time. So I guess that's really a good time to have it open in the early afternoon or so, in the early evening.
What happened to the idea of a Scarborough Arts Center? I guess a central based arts center. Does anyone know?
I don't know if they know, but my question is like, what's the likelihood of something like that happening?
What is the likelihood of something like that happening? And maybe you might want to discuss the pros and the cons of something along those lines.
I think it's really valuable to have places that are kind of dedicated to art. The challenge in Scarborough is where to put it, because we've already identified how challenging it is to get around Scarborough if you don't have access to a car and things like that. So how do you make it accessible to the most people is the big question, right? Whether it becomes one center or whether it becomes sort of an entity that has, 10 satellite centers or 10 satellite locations within other centers or something. I think it's a great idea though. I think dedicated art space would be a beautiful thing. If they asked me, I would vote yes.
Somehow in my mind, it seems so much easier than it. Why isn't more happening? And it's a bit dumbfounding to me. When I was a couple years ago, I was in Copenhagen, and I bring this up because I went to a few priority neighborhoods, so to speak, in Copenhagen. Yes, they do have them, and they're just as vibrant as they are here. But they were building community centers for about $1.5 million, right? $1.5 million bought them a community center. They were using unfinished wood that you can get at Home Depot, cheap plastic material and it was beautiful. It was gorgeous. The trick was they didn't actually heat it very much in the winter to maybe about 10 or 12 degrees. But it's a basketball court, right? So when it's 10 to 12 degrees out in the fall, you guys can go out and play, right? It's not that cold. So they save a bit of money on this community center in Copenhagen by not heating it that much in the winter and not air conditioning it in the summer, just opening the door. But it was taken care of. There was not, it was so, the community, just rallied support around them. And I look at that and I go, well, geez, that's what extra policing costs in Malvern or something every year, $1.5 million in additional cost. And I think for the same amount of money, why don't you just build little community centers, plant seeds for people to get themselves a sense of identity, create something of architectural excellence so that the world will pay attention. And it's a place for kids to hang out on a Friday night when they just want to blow off some steam. And why this never happens? Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know where it's at. But it's so easy, but just something just isn't quite clicking. And maybe if the world just kind of shifted by 5 degrees, we can figure it out. And I don't know.
Do you think the arts community and the development community, or not do you think, what role do you think the arts community, the development community, and all the other respective institutions, including government, what role do they have to play in acknowledging the cultural vibrant, expressive art that exists in the city of Toronto, in the city of Scarborough, and coming up with guidelines around development and funding so that they have a place to showcase those culturally relevant artistic expression in the mainstream.
I can answer it a little bit. There's this is archaic government thing known as Section 37, which is a bylaw that stipulates a certain percentage of the development's money that's put towards it can go towards it can be directed by the city where those funds can go, right? So in some cases, for instance, the councillor in St. Paul's neighborhood where the Witchwood Barns was developed, where all of the condos and developments that were going on around there, they used Sections 37 to take a bit of money from that development, and that was all funneled into the Witchwood Barns and that development there. So there was close to, I think, $2 million raised through development and fees that were going on, and you know, they didn't really actually have anything directly connected to that to the Witchwood Barns, but the condos and the area going up around there, they would benefit from it. So some of that money was being funneled towards it. So I know at City Hall, at the political level, that it's up to the councillors to direct some of those finances. As Section 37, they can say, this is really where I want that to go. Adam Vaughan, who's a councillor downtown, puts a lot of that money into new parks and new green spaces in his ward. He doesn't need it for some of the other stuff because there's quite a vibrant art community in his ward. So that's one mechanism that I know that our political governments and our developers can use in order to push that. I'm not exactly sure what happens out here with how the councillors use that Section 37 money. I assume a lot of them actually use it for green space and for community centers and stuff, but I'm not entirely sure of that. I don't know if one of you wants to address that. Well, that's the beauty of what we saw during in the federal election. There was a comment that our soon-to-be ex-prime minister said that the people who care about arts, all they care about is drinking wine and complaining about the grants they don't get, and that rallied the arts community in a political sense that I've never seen at a federal level, at least in the last 10 or 15 years.
There's also an issue of how do you search towards design for artistic excellence, meaning that it's a bit like venture capital. How do you see like this coming out of that same thing? It's like, oh, we'll give you families a $500 tax credit to send your 4-year-old daughter to learn how to use crayons properly. I mean, that's great, arts and crafts, but why not, can you have that like the current government is kind of redefining what culture is all about, and it sort of tries to be a great equalizer for people to have access to culture. But there's another side to culture, which is about how do you create design excellence? So how do you breed culture within a community? Maybe that's an issue, and maybe, what if, developers receive a tax credit if they produce an award-winning artist in their housing community, and there's new ways to kind of plant design excellence, and that's maybe what governments need to work on. And Section 37, when it's often used as a beautification tool, but it's not necessarily used as a neighborhood revitalization tool.
And the good councillors have used it in that, and I think in that sense, and use it effectively.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's a bit of a bribe. It's a legal bribe, more or less. It's like, okay, we'll give that condo 2 or 3 more stories if you give us X amount of money in Section 37, and then that can be used. But probably to address it is what I was kind of getting at is that the artists, not that the artistic community doesn't have enough on its plate to begin with, but artists tend to congregate and organize quite well together. And I think there's this idea of lobbying as groups and coming together. I'm not exactly. I'm not sure of those mechanisms.
Those are certain artists.
Certainly, but why not the local artists? Why not the hip hop artists from Regent Park and from Melbourne and so on to be able to lobby? I think there's. You're absolutely right that it's a unique type of artist, but that doesn't mean that world can't expand.
But those, that type of artists, let's just for argument's purposes, are going to rally together to get those few grants that are out there. They're not, they're the likelihood of them advocating for other artists or for 17-year-old artists.
I don't know about that, because you have some fantastic artists that that are downtown centric, but are doing amazing stuff, like Darren O'Donnell with the Parkdale School. He's getting youth involved with all of his projects, and I think there's certainly a much greater awareness that's starting to happen now about that.
There might need to be a government policy, and this is maybe something that some of you guys can advocate for, to view art as almost venture capital, to use art as an economic driver in communities.
And there's certainly enough information going on out there right now that shows how much culture contributes to the Canadian economy each year. There's an interesting project that's coming out of the mayor's office called the Tower Renewal Project. It's looking at the high-rises all around the inner suburbs and how to green them, make them more environmentally friendly, and also create community and jobs by, say, the energy savings that will come from the building. It will allow you to build maybe on the parking lot, maybe add commercial space there so the people that actually live in the building can work down below and create jobs. But there's also a cultural and artistic component to all of this too, which is the people that are living in these communities are going to, the idea is that they're going to be given access in a forum to try to express themselves through these communities. So that's one of the small ones that gets lost. Ian and I know. Did you work on the mayor's tower renewal at all with ERA?
Didn't work on it, but I'm part of the leaders
Right.
to do neighborhood incubators.
Yeah, the neighborhood incubator program. So there's a few of those things that are going on there, but we don't hear about them enough, obviously.
It was said earlier about like how we could create a big art thing, like a center for people, and it's like going to be like pretty and fancy everything. But do you really think that the youth who need that would rather wait like 2 years for that to be built than like little ones all around? Like, would that really help? Like to make a big fancy one where people have to travel to than little ones around that aren't maybe as fancy?
Well, this was the comment.
That's a great question.
This was a comment made about the community centers that you might see in, this is just the community centers that you might see in Copenhagen or some of the Scandinavian countries. In Austria, I've seen them, some parts in the southern United States where they're cheap. $1 million, $2 million, maybe less for a smaller community center. Gets people started, gets people rallied behind. It's almost like taking Wardsmere Park, adding a roof over it, not really heating it in the winter, but it's enough where people can actually take their jackets off and sit around for a little bit longer and have, a cup of coffee or hot chocolate or pop or whatever, and just talk and meet and grow, and more people come. And then over a period of time, incrementally, you can just tear that down and build something fancy if you wanted, or just leave it rough. But sometimes by being less ambitious, it creates a greater sense of ownership. It's in my little design world, it's called moving from informal to the formal. So when something's unofficially known as something, that's considered sort of informal, right? People just gather to this basketball court or this parking lot, and it's socially institutionalized, like you just know you're always going to be there, but it costs nothing to build because it's already there. And that's sort of part of the informal design parts of our city. When things become formal or really fancy, then sometimes it kills it, right? It's not so cool to hang out in those places anymore. But at the same time, it's kind of cool to build really fancy buildings because then you can bring in money or interest from the development community or other political tools that can really catapult that community. But I think we're all talking tonight about building the more cooler places that we own, and therefore the less fancy places.
Well, the thing that springs to mind for me immediately is for downtown artists and downtown arts organizations to link up with social programs that are going on in Scarborough. That's certainly been one of our program's biggest strengths. Is we've worked really closely with Red Pepper Spectacle Arts, and they've come out here and done just some remarkable work out here. And we draw on their strength. You know, they love us, and, you know, they're great, and they bring all kinds of resources, and they're wonderful to work with. But they also represent a network of community artists and a network of people who are really committed to developing emerging artists in suburban communities. So I think creating those links between social programming here and using social programs as opportunities to, you know, to incubate art and to have art bubble up, I think for me would seem like a really natural fit. So.
And my hunch is, I think I was doing this. It seems so formal coming, but my hunch is, it's like, the question is, who are you trying to serve within the arts community? And if you are, sometimes a downtown arts organization, its catchment basin, catchment, it tries to draw in people from all parts of the greater Toronto area. And then maybe as a hunch that if you're trying to do a real targeted kind of cultural venue in Scarborough, that you try and get the maximum amount of people in that community attend that event. So maybe it's not that it's parochial in the sense that it's only looking local, but the density is different. Maybe the cultural saturation is to try to empower the maximum number of people living in Scarborough, rather than trying to draw in people from the downtown or Oakville. The idea of patronage, that maybe at the downtown, the arts community, its patronage is more pan-Toronto.
Right.
And maybe how do you take that expertise of a patron that understands the big picture?
Yeah.
How can people in Scarborough maximize that? That maybe.
I'd like to thank our panelists, our wonderful panelists, for showing up tonight and sharing their local expertise. And we should also give a round of applause to the Scarborough Arts Council for putting this on and facilitating this. These are important discussions that we have, and I hope that when you leave here, you continue to have this conversation. I think that's one of the best things that we can actually do, is that the conversation doesn't stop when we leave the door. It continues on the buses, in our living rooms, in our basements, and continue to kind of push these ideas further to make the city obviously a better place. So thank you so much for coming out, and have a good night and safe drive and bus ride home.